Another big win for Oregon and Dan Lanning in week 5, taking home a 42-6 win over Stanford on the road. And we're breaking it down on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. We got a big episode for you today. We got a little recap and reaction action going on a Monday morning. And I am joined by my good friend Spencer McLaughlin of the LockedOn Ducks podcast, as well as Locked On Pac-12. Big win for the Ducks, 42-6 win over Stanford, and he's going to help me break this one down. How we doing, buddy?
We're doing well, better than the first quarter on Saturday, but all in all, it is the end result we were kind of hoping for.
Yeah, that was I watched mostly the first quarter. I wasn't able to watch the entire game, but I've since watched the highlights, so read the stats, listened to the pressers, and I'm up to speed now. But we got to talk about this one because Oregon went on the road for the second time this season, and aside from that first quarter, Spencer, they really dominated this game. I don't think that the halftime box score really told the whole story of the first half. It looked for a little bit like Oregon kind of was going to get more than they could handle, or getting all they could handle, rather, from Stanford. Really grinded out a ton of clock in that first quarter, but seemed like they kind of settled in after that. And then in the second half, they just let it ride.
I mean, I think they eventually woke up. Like the first two drives being 3 and out against a defense that is horrendously bad. That's not what Oregon was hoping for in that game. So I think Stanford is a long ways away from contending, though I think they're capable. I think Troy Taylor's actually a pretty solid coach. Their roster's just so bad. It's going to take a few years to kind of get the talent base up, and Stanford might need to change their approach with regards to the transfer portal. But I think they can be fine in the ACC. Ridiculous statement to have to make, but that's the one that we've got right now. So, really uninspiring first quarter and change, really, for the Ducks. I don't think they scored until, 9 minutes to go in the second quarter. I mean, it was, further into the second than you would have predicted. Yeah, 8:15 to go in the second quarter. So just about at the midway point is when the Ducks first got on the board. And you got to give credit to Stanford for having a really smart game plan. Like, they were running down the play clock on every snap, and they were running the football, and they were just trying to keep it moving and limit Oregon's possessions. And, that worked for a quarter and a half. And then eventually, I think Oregon kind of realized, hey, we're not losing this football game. We're going to win this game really, really big. We got to wake up and we got to have some energy. They just needed that spark. It reminds me of a lot of golf rounds I have where, I come out and I sleepwalk through the first 4 holes, and then I either, relax or more often get really ticked off, and then I focus at a high level, and then I play well for the next 14. I'm like, well, where was that in the first 4? Like, if we just done that from the start, this would have looked and felt completely different. But, at the end of the day, it's hard. We've seen teams over the last couple of years fail to get up for games on the farm with Stanford right now, because if they're not good, their fans aren't really showing up in a big way. So there's no ambiance, there's no environment, and that they're bad. So Oregon able to avoid the letdown that they had in 2021 and come back and win the game the way they should in dominant fashion. And I think it was really led by the defense to not allow a touchdown in the early portion of the game and just keep holding them to field goals, and then hold them without points after that field goal early in the second quarter. Love the way the defense played, and the offense, once they got things going, looked how they should.
So while the Ducks took a little bit to wake up, I think that's a good way to put it, that you had there. Took a little while to wake up against Stanford. You still have a dominant second half, and oddly enough, 42-6 for the second straight week after a win over Colorado the week prior. But Spencer, I think some fans maybe exit this game with a little bit more to be desired, because now you're in your bye week, or your work week, as Dan Lanning put it after the game. That's not going to fly on Montlake. That's not going to work against the Huskies in week 7. So I think we were texting about it a little bit earlier this season. I was asking you, is Oregon a fast start team? And you said so far they have been, but a little bit of a speed bump, I guess you could say, even in a 42-6 win. So I think that's definitely got to be an area where Oregon comes prepared and tries to really work on as much as you can in practice this week, because That was a pretty, lame atmosphere on the farm. My mom was there. I had some other friends that were there, and they said it was more Oregon fans than Stanford fans, but it's going to be a crazy atmosphere over there in Seattle. So that's not going to fly in week 7.
It's not. I also don't expect Oregon to come out the way they did against Stanford, which was just kind of, I think knowing that they're the better team, which they are, that they're going to win the football game, and that you just don't have any juice, right? Whether you're feeding off your home crowd at Autzen that's fueling you every time you do something good, or whether you're trying to silence the crowd that's around you and all the smack talk there's just none of that. Like there were no stakes on this game. It's a Pac-12 network hideaway game of like Oregon, Stanford, big line. Like that's not what it once was back in the early 2010s when Oregon Stanford was like that's one of the biggest games of the season. It's a little bit different right now, a lot different. In fact, the polar opposite of what it used to be. So I think I'll attribute it to that. We'll know for sure because Oregon did start kind of slow against Texas Tech. They went down and the offense had a couple first downs, but then they stalled and Bo Nix kind of I think was still getting comfortable behind the offensive line. He in that Texas Tech game, he had Tez Johnson wide open on a third down, but he kind of hitched backwards and threw off his back foot. And I think that was just a matter of expecting pressure when it wasn't actually there, or thinking he was going to see it when he didn't. And so, they got off to a slow start there. Then the defense allowed a big run to Tyler Shuck on 3rd and 4, and we're down 7-0 before you can really get things going. But then Oregon gets it going once again, and the long touchdown in Troy Franklin, and they responded there. And I'm not that worried about it because I think that Texas Tech was just a better team than Stanford, whereas this was more environment driven when you're talking about the slow start that they had. And I think the Ducks are not going to lack for energy and drive when they go to Seattle on October 14th in what is quite frankly going to be the biggest game Oregon plays this season, most likely. USC is going to be in the mix as well, but I mean, from a rivalry standpoint, implication standpoint, I mean, this is easily going to be Oregon's biggest game of the season, and boy, it's going to be a hotly contested one.
So Oregon was able to get going against Stanford. Better late than never, right? I think you ultimately feel good coming out of this game, especially if you're Dan Lanning, because you didn't meet the standard on the road in week 2 against Lubbock, but I think you definitely delivered a much more complete game despite the slow start. Defense was kind of the talk of the day. Bo Nix was Bo Nix, 290 yards and 4 touchdowns. The offensive line did a great job keeping him upright. Another game without a sack, so that's great. And then another game with maybe I shouldn't say another, but rather a game with very few penalties. Just 2 penalties for the Ducks. Very clean, very sound. Loved how they defended the RPOs that Stanford was deploying against them, and Bo Nix really kind of spread the wealth on offense. So there's a lot of different directions we can go as we kind of break this game down. I always like starting on offense, but you're helping me out on my show today, so I'll let you kind of see where we go.
Yeah, and by the way, just a quick stat that I was double checking a moment ago. Did you know that Oregon is 5-0 against the spread so far this year?
Did not know that.
They won by 74 against Portland State. I've never seen a 74-point line. I know the line was big, but Oregon covered. They were 6.5-point favorites against Tech. A lot of people would say, "Hey, shout out Jeffrey Bassa for that late game pick six to get the win and cover." And then they were, I think, somewhere in the 35-point range against Hawaii. They won by over 40. It might have been 40, but they covered there. 21 against Colorado, covered that. 27.5 against Stanford, covered that as well. So if people have been betting on the Ducks, just as a side note, they have been most successful this season, winning each of the last 5 games. And I think what that tells you is that, Oregon is capable of being really good. And we have seen them at their best be a very good football team. I think offensively, I didn't have that many questions coming into the year. I still have one lingering one that I was asking during the offseason, which was, is this offensive line going to be as good as last year? In pass protection, that answer appears to be mostly yes. I think they're about 90% of what they were last year. Bo Nix has been sacked twice through 5 games. I think he was sacked once in the first 7 or 8 last year. But, I mean, those numbers are so small. Like, pressure on Bo Nix is not a problem. It has not been a problem in any of the games with any amount of consistency to the point where it's slowing down the offense. So I don't worry about that. I do still look at the run blocking and say, Okay, you ran the ball well against Stanford, bad defense, and Colorado, bad defense. Portland State and Hawaii, inferior opponents. And then Texas Tech is the game where they struggled the most. And I think that's the best front seven they've gone up against by far. And then early in the game against Stanford, you saw those same sorts of problems where Bucky Irving and Jordan James didn't really have anywhere to go, but then they certainly got into the rhythm. So the team is capable of running the football, but it's just going to be a different test against Washington. I think in pass protection, even against a great front four, they'll hold up just fine. But I think a big key for the Ducks offensively is going to be, hey, how are they able to run the football? Because if you remember last year, the defense let Oregon down against Washington is the reason that they ended up losing the game. The offense put up 34 points, and a lot of those yards came on the ground. If you remember, Max, Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington just couldn't be tackled. Washington could not consistently get them on the ground, and they were breaking big runs. So that's the way they had success last year. I think Bo Nix is, somehow even perhaps better than what he was a season ago, but he looks really, really good, and I think you can rely on him at some level, but it's not like a Washington offense where they're, going to throw for 400 yards and run for 70 to 100. Like Oregon still needs to be running for 150 to 200 yards a game to be at their best offensively. So I think that's the question that I've still got. But, overall, we know these backs are dynamic. They're explosive. Jordan James looks great. I mean, he looks absolutely fantastic, and we know what Bucky Irving's capable of, and we'll see if Whittington's healthy come Washington time.
Bo Nix is Bo Nix. We don't need to say too much. I mean, he's just doing his thing. Love the job the offensive line's doing. And to your point on them, Spencer, I think one of the encouraging signs that I've seen from them, perhaps in run blocking specifically, is just their progression to that second and even sometimes third level of the defense. I think a lot of the times when I'm watching the tape on these guys, you're just seeing blocks that maybe aren't, they're not orchestrated. I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Like they're just doing a good job getting a hat on a hat. Someone's looking for a guy to, the offensive line is looking for a guy to get their hands on. And I feel like they're doing a great job of that. I think about Bo Nix's touchdown run against Colorado, where Dave Iuli did a great job, just getting his hands on a guy. And then I love the job. I think one of the things that we have to give praise for is the tight ends blocking in the run game. Mm-hmm. I mean, Patrick Herbert and Terrence Ferguson have done a phenomenal job.
Herbert's been really good. Like we knew what T. Ferg was. We saw that last year, and I think he's off to the NFL after this season. But Herbert looks the best he has been so far as a Duck.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm really glad that we got to see a little bit more from those guys against Stanford. Terrence Ferguson obviously had the touchdown grab, which was great. And then Patrick Herbert only got targeted once, but hey, he caught it, so that's good. And then just as far as the running game goes, I'm not really super concerned about the blocking. I think that they're just continuing to get better with each week that they play together. Bucky Irving continued to do his thing. Jordan James only recorded 6 carries against Stanford, but he still looked good. They combined for about 175 yards on the ground.
Yeah, James had 6 carries for 88 yards, and it's not like it was a 60-yarder goosing the stats. It was just every carry was like 10, 15, 30 yards, just all over the place. Lanes. There were big lanes there. Like I said, it took them a while to find their footing, but once they did offensively, they had places to run, and Jordan James looks explosive.
Yeah, he's the real deal. I mean, I was really hearing a lot of good things about him after the Ducks flipped him from Georgia, coming out of the state of Tennessee. We know that Carlos Locklin loves recruiting guys from that SEC footprint out there in the South, and Jordan James continues to deliver. Maybe worth mentioning that Jaden Lamar and Dante Dowdell both played, and they're now up to 4 games. So their next one will be their 5th, and that will effectively burn the red shirt, at least for the freshman year. So that's something to keep an eye on, especially as we monitor Noah Whittington's health going into Week 7 against Washington. But I don't think
can I touch on that for just a second?
Sure.
So with Lamar and Dowdell, I think with the trio of running backs that are ahead of them this season, how likely do we think it is? Jordan James has to come back, right? So you know that he's going to be there at the very least. But how likely does it seem that both Irving and Whittington would go to the NFL, knowing that in all likelihood Lamar and Dowdell probably burn their red shirts this season? Like if you're an Oregon staff, That's something that you have to consider. Like you're focusing on the opponent, of course, but you also are aware. Like Dan Lanning, Carlos Locklin, all these guys know the snap counts that players have and whether or not they want to burn the red shirt and whatnot. I wonder, and maybe they don't know. Maybe they feel good about whether they'd be able to bring somebody in from the portal or what they'll get from the high school ranks or anything like that. But I just wonder if those guys having set themselves up to essentially burn their red shirts doesn't mean the staff knows one of Irving or Whittington are coming back for a final season. Just the thought I had.
No, for sure. I think that's it's a definitely a legitimate question. I think that it's pretty much said and done that Bucky is going to be heading to the NFL. I feel like Noah Whittington is a little bit more of a question mark, not in terms of whether or not he's an NFL talent. Clearly, I think he's proven that to this point in his Oregon career, even though it's only been 1 year and some change after coming over from Western Kentucky. But I think that he's going to kind of have to play out the rest of the season and then get some of the draft feedback headed into that. But I think as far as it concerns Dowdell and Lamar, I think both of those guys, it's not a stretch to think, especially if Noah's not healthy, that they both end up burning their red shirts this year. But it's not that big of a deal. I think at least one of them burns their red shirt. I think that's looking more likely right now. But it's like Dan Lanning says, if you're good enough, you're old enough. As cliche as it's sounding, but they both look really talented. I think that Lamar is the more versatile of the two, whereas Dowdell is more of that true power back. But they're both really talented, and I think that's one of the. We'll get an answer, before too long, right? Once that Washington game comes around, I think we'll get a better idea of what's ultimately going to happen with them.
Probably, yeah. I think against the Huskies, it'll be a heavy dose of Irving and James, and it looks like Lamar's ahead of Dowdell on the depth chart at this point in the season. And if they feel like they need to go to a third running back, it'd probably be Jaden Lamar. But I think against Washington, it's going to be Bucky Irving and Jordan James and Whittington if he's healthy. Otherwise, I think they'll just go with the top two because those two true freshmen, I mean, that's just such a big spot to put them in, and everything you have to deal with as a running back, not just taking shots on the road and dealing with the crowd noise and everything, but pass protection and catching the ball out of the backfield and everything like that. I think Bucky and Jordan will be playing a lot.
Totally agree. Let's shift gears here a little bit, Spencer, and talk about that defense from Oregon on Saturday. 5 sacks from the Ducks defense, and they've already actually tied their mark from a season ago. I think we were talking about it the last time we spoke on the podcast.
18 sacks through 5 games. They had 18 in 13 games last year.
It's crazy. It's just it's another stat that I think demonstrates the kind of leap that this defense has taken from year 1 to year 2 with Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi. I spoke last week with you, I think, just about how this is a big statement, I think, for Tosh Lupoi. We all knew he was a great recruiter, but the on-field product was kind of leaving a little bit to be desired, I think is fair to say. But the defense did a phenomenal job against Stanford. I was talking to somebody this morning just about how they did a really good job defending that RPO and how difficult it is. Just guys have to be communicating in the right spot at the right time. I think that it was a great statement that Oregon has the right dudes on their defense now in 2023, and you're getting really good contributions from a lot of these new guys, Jordan Birch and Evan Williams. Evan Williams has been phenomenal as a pass rusher, notching another sack against Stanford. So there's really so many good things you could say about this game. But I think Evan Williams and Jordan Birch are definitely some of the standout guys for me.
Yeah, I love what I'm seeing defensively. How could you not? I mean, really, aside from the Texas Tech game, which had a lot of great moments from the defense, lest we forget the game-clinching pick six or one of the other 3 turnovers plus a 4th down stop the defense made in that game, they were sloppy. We remember that. And I think that if Oregon had, been a little bit more tight with their penalties, they would have had a much better defensive performance. I think my game prediction was 34-24. I thought they would win. It ended up being 38-30, so I was kind of in the right range. But I think the reason that, technically I have to say I think because I can't say for certain. But if Kyrie Jackson doesn't commit that pass interference on 3rd and 18, I am pretty convinced that we get the ball back, go down, get at least a field goal, go up 18-7, and the game is very different. Instead, that leads to a touchdown. And I think that 6 point drive for the Red Raiders was because of the penalties. I think they got help in other areas as well. I think penalties cost the Oregon defense 7 to 10 points. And do you know how many penalty yards off the top of your head, Stanford or Oregon had against Stanford on Saturday?
Not off the top of my head. I do have the stats here,
Two,
so I can look. That
two,
was it 2 yards
for
or two total
20,
penalties? Oh,
two
okay.
for 20 yards in the game. That's 100 fewer penalty yards, 104 to be exact, than they had against Texas Tech. So that element is improving, and it's something I was watching for going into this game is, hey, if you cut down on the penalties, this defense is even better. And they still had a lot against Colorado, but they got better here against Stanford. And if that continues going forward, I mean, the talent, depth, and blend of experience that they've got in there, I think is really good. And, the Red Raiders game was far from perfect, but still they came through in big moments. And since that game, Max, I literally do not think Oregon's defense can have played any better over the last 3 games. The starters haven't given up a touchdown in the last 11 quarters of football they've played. That's an insane stat. I don't care who you're going up against. Portland State scored on their opening drive against the starting defense for the Ducks. They didn't score after that. So we've seen adjustments, not just over the course of games, but over the course of the season. The sorts of adjustments, particularly in games that were, lacking in those 2 defensive lapses in 2022. And, they've got their biggest test of the season. But I feel good about where Oregon's defense is at. I feel better about it than last year's unit and what they were putting on the field. Even before they played a lot of big games, they had some good defensive moments, but I don't think they looked anything like this. They are faster. They are, I think, a little bit more aggressive with their blitzes and their coverage style. I think we're not seeing as much soft zone coverage as we did a season ago. And, Oregon definitely, by the way, needs Kyrie Jackson to be okay because he's going to have to match up with Rome Odunze. That's Jaleel Florence is awesome. He's a true sophomore and looks outstanding. And I like Oregon's secondary a lot, but I would really, really love for Kyrie Jackson to be available against Rome Odunze. And, hopefully after the bye week, he will be. I look at this defensive unit and say, man, I think scheme, I think play calling, execution, tackling, physicality, it's all better than what it was a year ago.
Ducks are improving in some really key areas that you mentioned there, Spencer. The tackling is great. Just thinking of all the arm tackles that we saw a year ago, the penalties, I think you can draw a lot from that improvement. Dan Lanning was talking about how they're going to be doing less up downs this week following following their improved performance against Stanford in that regard. So the discipline is definitely kind of settling in. And I think it's just guys that know where they're supposed to be. Their execution is trending upwards. So I think exiting the Stanford game, you're seeing all the right things from your defense. You're seeing the improved pass rush. You're seeing a great run defense as well. And I think that the Kyrie Jackson point is super notable. Dan Lanning was asked about him post game and said that he didn't really have anything else. We also didn't see a
Shocker.
whole lot. We also, huge shocker. We also didn't see a whole lot of Popo Amavai. He did play in the game, but didn't record a ton of snaps from my understanding. So you figure that's another key guy that you're going to need to see a lot of. But I think it's worth mentioning, Spencer, that even when Kyrie Jackson, again, I mean, I don't want to be inaccurate because I didn't watch the entire game, but once he exited, I believe he exited, you have guys that you can turn to like Triquez Bridges and Dante Manning who have played a lot of ball. And like we've talked about before, are starting caliber corners for your team. And then to look in the trenches, Taki Taimani, I thought looked great.
Oh, dude,
Against Stanford.
Taki's
So
playing
there's just
so well.
so little drop off, especially along the D line. And I think that's exactly where you want to be if you're going to have question marks like this as it pertains to Popo and Kyrie's health. Maybe we'll get an update tonight on Monday when Dan talks to reporters.
Yeah, I think that defensively, Oregon has been really, really good. And the defensive line is kind of where it all starts up front. Because when you look at what Oregon has done defensively this year, and Lanning, I think, has talked about it, that the secondary is playing well, but the secondary is also playing well. Why? Because they they don't have to cover for as long. They can be a little bit more aggressive because they know that there's going to be pressure on the quarterback. And I was just pulling up the PFF grades, which are not everything, but I think can tell you they can be a good indicator of where guys are at right now. Taki Taimani grades as a top 25 interior defender in all of college football this season. And that tracks with what I've seen. He has made some big impact plays, the likes of which, were kind of fleeting from him last year. Like he saw a couple moments, but I didn't see anything like this. He's taken a big step forward for the Ducks. And, his run defense grade is almost a 90 right now, which is insane. That is insanely high. And it takes a lot to have that sort of grade. It's actually the fourth highest in the country. So I think that he's been outstanding. We know Rodgers is good. Popo, when he plays, is great. Brandon Dorlus, did you see that sack he had on the fourth down late in the game?
Oh, it just flew in there.
I mean, guys who are able to line up as a defensive tackle shouldn't be that explosive, but Dorlus is. He's just built like that, and he is, such a great piece to have had back from last year's defense, and I think looks even better than last season. Like, that's an NFL guy, and that's kind of where you need to look at from a defensive standpoint for the Ducks. Is like, well, the best defense Oregon's had a bunch of defensive players on it who made the NFL or are still playing in the NFL. Kayvon Thibodeau, yeah, the top 5 pick in the draft. Javon Holland, yeah, he's on the Dolphins. He's really, really good. Diamador Lenore, yeah, starts for the San
Niners,
Francisco
baby.
49ers, yeah. I know you're a big Niners guy. My Seahawks, I need them to win tonight against the Giants because I got a couple Giants fans I know, and I can't deal with that. I can't deal with that sort of smack talk. Not when we're playing Daniel freaking Jones on Monday Night Football. So I just look around and say, boy, I'm starting to see defensive players that are looking like NFL caliber guys next year or the year after, and I think that they are just continuing to play really, really well. And the defensive front is kind of where it's all started. Like, that's the biggest change from Oregon's team compared to a season ago defensively is how well the defensive line plays.
And the craziest thing about it is that it's not even like it was a bad group last year. Like, so many of them came back and they're just playing at such a high level. So the execution is there. I think Jordan Birch, you're really starting to see more of, why he came to Oregon. I'm like, Dan Lanning just got to be watching this tape. Like, yeah, dude, that's why I wanted you to come be a part of this defense, because that's what elite defensive linemen look like. And again, they haven't played amazing teams yet, so we kind of have to temper expectations a little bit, right? Pump the brakes a little bit, but he looks good, and that's all you can ask for. I want to hit a little bit more, Spencer, on Evan Williams, because I think
let's do it.
is gonna play a really big role in the direction that this defense is headed. You just see that I love the exotic pressures and blitzes that they're dialing up. Another strong game from Tosh Lapoy or Dan Lanning. We don't know who's calling the defense right now, but either way,
could be Chris Hampton for all we know.
It could be, yeah, co-defensive coordinator. But whether you're looking at Evan Williams or Kyrie Jackson or Nico Reed, I think came off the edge a little bit in that one. I think Evan Williams' progression is a really key thing to hit on here, because I don't want to say Swiss Army knife type of a deal, but he is incredibly versatile, and I think he's kind of doing all the right things in terms of what you're asking from him for this defense and showing why he's an impact transfer.
Yeah, he is, and he struggled against Texas Tech, by the way. He didn't play against Portland State, so the Red Raiders was his first game of the year, and he did not have a good game, like just by any objective measure. He had a bad run fill on the Tyler Shuck long quarterback run. He and Triquez Bridges both had a blown coverage assignment on a 3rd down and long. He didn't really make a bunch of impact plays. Like, he didn't have a good game. Since then, Max, Evan Williams looks like a dude. I mean, we haven't seen him make a play on the back end yet, because really the ball isn't getting thrown downfield on this Oregon defense so far. But, his overall PFF grade is 75.4. In the Texas Tech game, it was like 36. It was like 35-36. So that's how well he's played in the 3 games since. And the biggest reason is the pass rush. Like when he comes on a blitz, he is there so quickly. He's laying the lumber. And you know what I've liked about what I've seen from the secondary getting after the quarterback, Max, is it feels like the success rate of when the blitzes are called from a defensive back is so high. it feels like it's really, really high. And that is a credit to the entire defensive staff, Lanning, Lupoy, Hampton. Those are your top three defensive coaches in order, and they are all clearly on the same page right now with, hey, let's bring a corner blitz. Hey, let's throw a safety in there. Hey, let's rush six. Hey, whatever it is. And they're generating free rushers. I mean, Evan Williams came up the middle because I think it was Jamal Hill just blasted. I mean, just absolutely harpooned a running back coming up the middle first. That paved the way for Evan Williams. And the speed is so high from guys like Evan Williams or Tysheem Johnson as well, or Kyrie Jackson, who had a sack, that they're able to exploit the lanes created by the pressure concepts they're designing. And I think they're just doing a great job overall as a staff with, when to dial those up. And the execution's been there, and they've got the personnel, I think, to match it.
They definitely do. One more quick point I want to hit on, Spencer, then I'll get you out of here. Kind of operating in tandem with this improved performance and execution from the defense is the depth. I think just the rotation that we've seen from Oregon so far this season is great because we know that they haven't hit the meat of their schedule yet, but so many guys have seen the field, which I think is really, really important. You're having guys like Jake Shipley and Amarion Winston seeing a lot of playing time. I don't think they're necessarily projected to be massive contributors, but you might need them if something pops up. And another point too here, Spencer, we still haven't seen Justin Jacobs. Do you want to break him in against the top 10 team in Washington? I'm not so sure, but I think he was billed as one of the top transfer portal additions for this team going into the season. We still haven't seen him. We don't know what it's going to necessarily look like, but I think it just drives home the point that this defense could still is getting better.
Yeah, and I think that that's a piece I'm curious to see. I mean, props to Bryce Betcher. I mean, that guy has stepped in.
Beast.
Nobody had him, myself included, on their radar as a regular player at the linebacker position. Like that just hasn't been. Let me pull up the snap count real quick because I've been interested to see how he's played versus Connor Soley. And guess what? If he's outsnapped Soley, I wouldn't be surprised. Like Soley's been solid. He's put up a lot of quiet numbers this year. But I mean, I just look at Betcher and I'm like, guy seems to be making plays. Kind of all over the place. Yeah, he's way out snapping. Soley's only had 26 or 47 snaps this year. Betcher's at 118. Devin Jackson 111. And then Jamal Hill with 158 and Jeff Boss at 214. So pretty clear who the top four linebackers are. I think the pairings have been Hill and Jackson and then Betcher and Bossa. And in that 4-2-5, I see him kind of do a hockey line change with, hey, you two go in, hey, these two go in. And I think that what you have there is kind of a nice balance in each of those pairings. Betcher is, I think, a little bit smaller than Jeffrey Bossa, who bulked up a lot this year. I mean, Betcher was playing safety in the spring game, and then between Jamal Hill and Devin Jackson, I think Hill is a little bit bigger and Jackson's a little bit faster. And I think that you've gotten good production out of that unit so far this season. And I don't know where Justin Jacobs fits in, but if he's the most gifted of the bunch, which he could be, then it seems like there's only more room to grow for the Oregon defense. I don't think a ton. I mean, you can certainly do better, I guess, at the linebacker spot. But I mean, what's been their big mistake this year? Like, Oregon's good against the run. They've blitzed well. They've had sacks. They're making tackles in space. That Jamal Hill tackle on third down on the speed option play to get Casey Filkins on the ground. I mean, that's as good a play as you're going to make from a linebacker to come up with a stop on 3rd and 1. So I love the way that they're being aggressive as well. I feel like their first step is forward instead of back to kind of take away some of those running lanes. They look like they're just so sound in their assignments and trusting what they need to be doing, and trust in the coaching staff that they're being put in the right positions, and trust in their instincts as well. It's been really, really fun to watch so far.
Really what it boils down to is this. I think on both sides of the ball, you couldn't really ask to be in a much better spot heading into this Washington game.
Not much, no.
And you haven't played phenomenal teams, but you can't do anything about that. All you can do is play the guys in front of you. So I think while it's great where they're at, I'm not necessarily saying pump the brakes, but don't be too over the moon about it, right? I think that's the way I would kind of leave it. But Spencer, before we get you out of here, where can people find more of you and the work you have going on in the space?
I'm on Twitter at Smalls_55, and I host Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12 Monday through Friday on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's been quite the season so far, and the best is yet to come. Hopefully that's the case on the field for the Ducks as well. But boy, 2 weeks to get ready for the Washington game. It is going to be something else.
It's going to be a fun one, no doubt about it. I was telling Spencer that I just booked my tickets to the Cal and USC games, so that's going to be sick. Cannot wait to be back in Eugene. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you want to find more of me, important to lock in with me on social media, I'm at mtorres sports on both Twitter and Instagram. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button while you're at it. At Oregon Football, Max Torres, and then read all my stuff over on ducksdigest.com. Huge thank you to Spencer for coming on. And we will catch you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.